Wilson is an extremely interesting figure who's kind of bridging the gap between what I would call old and new age. He's one of the first people that starts to blend these ideas of the occult with modern psychology, radical philosophy, postmodern thought, and so forth. And he does it all in this really interesting countercultural context. So, Wilson was born in 1932 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His father left the family when Robert was very young, and then his mother moved to Chicago and got remarried. She actually remarried a man named Kenneth Grant, who was a follower of Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. So Wilson was kind of introduced to these ideas at a pretty young age. But then he ended up going to live with his grandmother for a time. And while he was living with his grandmother, he actually witnessed something that could only be described as paranormal. And Wilson says that there was a dog in the house, and the dog started barking furiously at the wall, like running back and forth, barking furiously. And then Wilson's grandmother said, "I think someone's just died." And right after she said that, the dog stopped barking and everything was fine. Well, a little bit later on, Wilson found out that his uncle had died overseas while he was in military service. So, this seems to have made a pretty big impression on him, because he says that this was the first time he ever experienced anything that seemed to indicate that there was more to reality than what could be perceived with our senses. He started reading science fiction pretty early on and also became interested in magic as well. He attended Northwestern University and studied journalism. In college, he met the artist and writer Robert Shee, who became one of his best friends and collaborators. They worked together to publish a number of underground newspapers and magazines. Wilson also served in the army, and he was stationed in Japan at the end of World War II. Wilson and Shee were already interested in various mystical subjects. But it was in Japan where they became enamored with the ideas of Aleister Crowley, who was one of the most infamous magicians of the 20th century. They were introduced to some of Crowley's writings, and they decided to start their own magical order called the Nomadic Order of the Trapezoid. Wilson also became acquainted with the work of Carl Jung while in Japan, and became fascinated with analytical psychology and its emphasis on symbolism and the collective unconscious. When Wilson returned from Japan, he co-founded a magazine called Reality with Shee, but it folded after only a few issues. He then took a job as an editor at Dell Comics, but soon became disillusioned with the work and quit. He started writing science fiction novels, but none of them were accepted for publication. In the late 1960s, he met Timothy Leary, who was famous for his advocacy of psychedelic drugs and their potential for spiritual and psychological growth. Wilson became a researcher at the International Foundation for Internal Freedom, which was founded by Leary, and began experimenting with psychedelics. Wilson's experience with LSD eventually led him to embrace a form of what he calls model agnosticism. This was developed in large part as a response to his experience with psychoactive substances. Psychedelics. Wilson realized that consciousness was much more complex than we tend to assume. We usually assume that there's a single consciousness, and we project that consciousness outwards onto the world and interpret things through that lens. But he realized that there are multiple ways of perceiving reality and being conscious. So he developed this idea of model agnosticism to basically say that we need to remain agnostic about consciousness. We shouldn't jump to any conclusions or try to force any particular model of consciousness onto other people, or say that one model is absolutely correct. Instead, we should acknowledge the complexity of consciousness and remain open to different models. But it wasn't just psychedelic drugs that influenced Wilson's philosophical development. He was also heavily influenced by the mystic G.I. Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff advocated a form of what's called a radical Christianity, which didn't involve belief in the historical Jesus, but rather focused on the teachings that Jesus gave and attempted to apply them in a more rational way. Basically, Gurdjieff was saying that if you look at the sayings of Jesus, you can extract a sort of set of principles that can help you to actualize your potential and grow psychologically. And so, Wilson was heavily influenced by this teaching, especially by the idea that we have immense potential as humans, and we can tap into that potential and evolve further if we so choose. The main text that Gurdjieff wrote is called Beelzefist, which presents this mystical philosophy. Wilson even translated Beelzefist into English in the 1970s. During the 1970s, Wilson became increasingly disenchanted with the New Left and its focus on political activism. He felt that it wasn't addressing the deeper psychological issues that he was concerned with. He was also becoming more interested in Eastern philosophy, and especially Taoism, which advocates a more effortless way of living in harmony with nature. He continued to collaborate with Robert Shee throughout the 1970s. Together, they published a number of novels such as Cosmic Trigger and The Illuminatus trilogy. These works often deal with themes of conspiracy, magic, and the nature of reality. The characters in these stories frequently explore altered states of consciousness and engage in what Wilson calls reality tunnels, which are essentially different ways of interpreting the world. One of the main characters in these books is a semi-fictionalized version of Wilson himself, who is called Bob. One of the central themes of Wilson's work is the idea that we all inhabit what he calls reality tunnels, which are essentially different ways of perceiving and understanding reality. Our beliefs, assumptions, and expectations shape our reality tunnels and determine what we are able to see and experience. One of the characters in Cosmic Trigger says, "The universe is a multi-dimensional hologram projected from an infinite number of centers of consciousness." This reflects Wilson's belief in the interconnectedness of all things and the idea that reality is not a fixed external thing, but is constantly being created through our interactions with it. In his nonfiction works, Wilson explores a wide range of topics related to consciousness, such as altered states of consciousness, the occult, and the potential for human evolution. He also critiques conventional science and religion, which he sees as limiting our ability to understand the true nature of reality. In his book, The H.P. Lovecraft Reader, Wilson writes, "Science is a mythology that has outlived its usefulness. It is the dominant mythology of our time. Religion used to fill most of the blanks in our knowledge, but now science fills them in and creates new blanks. Instead of relying on fixed beliefs or doctrines, Wilson advocates for a more open-minded and exploratory approach to understanding reality. He encourages us to be willing to question our assumptions and to consider alternative perspectives." In his book, Quantum Psychology, Wilson writes, "There are no certainties in psychology except those which are matters of mathematics. All the rest are functions of consciousness and therefore relative to the individual and to the period of time during which he lives." So Wilson was one of the first thinkers to recognize the connection between the mystical and the new scientific discoveries about the nature of reality. He was one of the first people that really brought mysticism into the realm of modern science and tried to merge the two together. One of the central concepts in Wilson's work is his 8-circuit model of consciousness. This model proposes that human beings have 8 different levels or circuits of consciousness that can be developed and expanded through various practices, including meditation, psychedelics, and other forms of altered states. Each circuit corresponds to a different level of understanding and awareness. And as one progresses through the circuits, they gain a deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. Another important concept in Wilson's work is his view of the universe as a self-organizing system. He believed that the universe was not merely a collection of matter and energy, but was a living, evolving entity that was constantly creating itself. This view of the universe is reflected in his statement, "All is mind and all is one." In addition to his fiction and non-fiction works, Wilson was also involved in a number of other activities, including filmmaking, music, and performance art. He was also a prolific lecturer, and his talks and interviews cover a wide range of topics related to consciousness, culture, and society. Wilson's work has been highly influential in shaping modern New Age currents, especially in the areas of consciousness studies and the exploration of altered states. His ideas have also influenced various countercultural movements, particularly those focused on spirituality and personal growth. Some critics argue that Wilson's ideas are too vague and all-encompassing, and that he lacks a clear and systematic philosophical framework. However, Wilson's work is perhaps best appreciated as a starting point for exploring rather than a definitive statement of beliefs. His goal was not to provide answers, but to ask questions and to challenge readers to think critically about the nature of reality and the limits of their own beliefs. His work remains relevant today because it continues to push the boundaries of what is possible in terms of human consciousness and understanding. His ideas have contributed to the ongoing dialogue between science, mysticism, and human potential that continues to shape our understanding of ourselves and the universe. I think Robert Wilson is a fascinating thinker who bridges the gap between the old esotericism and the New Age movements. What makes Wilson unique is that he doesn't dogmatically cling to any particular set of beliefs or ideas. Rather, he adopts a playful and critical stance towards reality, encouraging us to experiment and explore with a sense of freedom and wonder. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you'd be interested in learning more about esotericism, check out my other videos. Like and subscribe.